Welcome to RG's Small Engine YouTube channel. Today we're going to be cleaning the carburetor on a Briggs & Stratton on a power washer that has the primer style carburetor that is entirely made of plastic. This is the unit we are going to be working on with the primer, and I'm going to show you how to do this properly. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove the 3 screws that hold this blower housing. Take those off, move this thing out of the way, like so. Now we can take off the air box cover and the air filter and put that off to the side. Now what we have here is this entirely plastic carburetor. If it was the auto choke, this white part here would have the choke linkage, and there would be a linkage that goes across all the way here to your exhaust, where there would be a thermostat that would control the choke open and close, but we do not have that. We have the primer button. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out the bolt here and here, here and here, and take this cover off. Okay, so we're going to do that now. Like so. Disconnect this breather tube and just kind of lay this off to the side. We don't have to take it completely off. We do have a kill switch here that is attached, and the wiring is back in here. This just goes from the ignition coil through the switch to ground. We don't necessarily have to take that off. What we're going to do next, though, we're going to remove this clamp. You can see it from the fuel line. And get this fuel line loose like that. If you've got fuel in the tank, it's perfect time to have a catch can ready. This fuel tank just sits down in here. Sometimes you need to rock it forward a little bit and then just kind of pull up like so, and it will come right off, and then you can set it in your catch can and drain out whatever fuel that you might have in there. So now that we're open, free and clear here, this carburetor really isn't held in by much. You can just wobble it a little and slide it towards you. Disconnect the throttle linkage here like that. Now we have the carburetor in hand. Now as the carburetor comes off, there's some important pieces here on the other side, and I'll show you that. There is an O-ring that belongs in there first, like so, and then this stayed on the intake tube. If we can get this to slide off, this goes into the carburetor venturi here and snaps in, and that holds the O-ring in place. You don't want to lose that. You don't want to not put it in, and you don't want to get it coated in carburetor cleaner or any other solvent. That O-ring will swell up and you'll never get it to fit in there right, and that's what makes the perfect seal around the carburetor and the intake tube to prevent any air leaks. So we're going to take this carburetor to the bench now, take it apart, show you the insides, clean it out, and we'll put it back together. Okay, now we're going to take this carburetor apart. Pretty much all you have on the bottom here is these 2 screws and this plastic bowl. So we're going to take these 2 screws out. And we're going to take a flathead screwdriver here and just kind of pry and separate the bowl from this carburetor body. Now there's a giant O-ring on the bottom of this bowl. Okay, around here. You don't really want to mess with that too much. Typically they do not leak, and the bowl is still full of old fuel. So we're going to dump this out, and we're going to look inside the bowl to make sure that there's no floaties or debris or anything in there. So I'm going to give it a quick shot of a carburetor cleaner, dump it out, set it off to the side, and just let that drip dry. Now here's the important parts of this carburetor here. You've got your main jet and your float. This main jet assembly will come out, and there's actually 3 emulsion tubes on the back of this assembly here. So what you need is a really small flathead screwdriver, and on the side where the main jet is pointing, to the left of it, there's a indentation where you can fit the screwdriver in, and you just pry this up, and this whole assembly comes right out. Real convenient, like that. So you've got a jet here, another jet, a few O-rings, and an air bleed. So since we've got O-rings on here, and you don't want to get those covered in any sort of carburetor cleaner or something that's going to damage the O-ring, what I use is a shipping tag with a wire on it, and I poke out these jets. Just give them a good poke, move it all around, do it to all of them that you can. Make sure there's no debris, look down inside, and then give it a good blowout. As long as you can see through all of these holes and they look clear to you, you're good to go. Then you just reinsert this the same way that it came out, put it down in there, push it in tight till it snaps in, and the O-rings create that seal. Now when you put the bowl back on, note the direction that this jet is facing. The bowl has a cavity built into it to fit perfectly over that. So you don't want to put it the wrong direction. Just pay attention to detail when you put this back together. So you just set the bowl back on there. Now that big O-ring I mentioned is going to make it fit tight, so you squeeze it together best you can. Put your screws in like that. And then I recommend that you use hand tools to reassemble. Considering that this carburetor is plastic, these screws will strip this thing out in 2 seconds flat, and you don't really want to do that. So just take some time, put them in by hand, and do it right the first time. So we'll get these screwed down good and tight, like so. Now the carburetor is essentially cleaned. Your primer function here, this is where the air box plate sits, and your primer button pushes air into this hole. This O-ring will seal that hole. However, these 2 holes here are where the screws go that hold the cover on. Again, very important to use hand tools, and do not reef these down, because if you strip this, it will not hold tight against this O-ring, and your primer may not work, which would make it incredibly difficult to start. So let's take this back to the power washer, put it on, and move on. Okay, we're back to the power washer. We're going to put our carburetor back on. First thing we're going to do is going to put the throttle linkage back where it was. Alright. Now this throttle linkage and the fuel line fitting are going to fit under here like this. So you don't want your breather tube to be underneath the throttle because that can cause some binding issues. Another good point, always make sure there's a little bit of grease on the throttle linkages here. That can be a deterrent for a stuck or binding throttle, and you don't need your power washer to run NASCAR speed to do its job. Now we're going to put the fuel tank back on here. Grab our fuel tank that we flushed out and made sure there's no debris. So we're going to just kind of push this fuel line on a little bit and then push this back down onto the blower housing till it seats in there real good. Then we're going to take our hose clamp here for the fuel line, get that on there so it's nice and snug like that. Now we're going to install the primer bracket and air filter housing. And you want to make sure that you attach your breather hose, which I just did right here. Everything should line up. The bigger screws go on the outside. You got one way back here, and you have one here. Now these screws go into metal, so these screws are okay to use an electric impact set gently, or if you want to be super safe, you can do it with hand tools, and that's totally fine. Now we need to put in the important screws that hold the base to the actual primer O-ring, and we're going to do that with hand tools. I'm just going to use a small ratchet. I'm going to start these by hand to make sure that I don't mess them up like that. We're just going to screw these ones in like this. Now once we get those screwed in, it's okay to go ahead and put in your air filter in there, and the air filter cover. Snap that on. Then it's time for your recoil starter, which just sits on there pretty easily. Give it a couple gentle tugs just to make sure that that starter has seated on the cup. If not, and you tighten this down, you could break parts of that recoil starter, and now you've got more work to do. So we're going to go ahead and tighten this down. Alright, now we're going to add some fresh fuel. A lot of customers will say that they've filled it up with fresh gas and it's sat for a couple years and it won't start. If I'm taking this machine apart and I'm cleaning this carburetor, it doesn't faze me at all that you say it's fresh fuel. I'm emptying it, I'm flushing the tank, and I'm putting in what I know is fresh fuel. What I typically use here is True Fuel. It's a non-ethanol, already treated, high octane fuel. It's got a good shelf life, much more than an ethanol fuel. So I'm going to fill up the tank now with some fresh gas that I know is fresh after this carburetor cleaning. And then we're going to check the oil just to be sure that the oil is good, full, clean. And then we will give it a pull and see what happens. Oil looks spot on. So we're just going to give it a couple of primes here. Make sure the switch is in the on position. And we'll give it a pull and see what happens. And that's how you clean a plastic carburetor on a Brigg & Stratton. Like and subscribe to this page. I'll have more videos to follow. If you have any questions, or you need some answers, or you need a tutorial video on how to do something that you've got at home, comment below, let me know. I'll read the comments. I'll even do a video and show you how to do it. Thanks a lot.